You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. This episode is the first in a two-part series on opening and managing meetings. In this part, you'll study how to open a meeting. In the second part, you'll learn how to manage the discussion. The listening takes place in the Singapore offices of Dane Line, an international shipping company. Martin, the general manager, is chairing a meeting with Sandra, David, and Sam to discuss a budget shortfall. Shortfall means their budget has fallen short of expectations. In other words, they don't have enough money. So, they need to make some cuts. To chair a meeting is to lead the meeting. We can say that Martin is the chairperson. So in these two episodes on opening and managing meetings, you'll be learning language for chairing meetings.
All right, is everybody here? Great. I think we can get started. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I had to call this meeting at such short notice. Did you all get a copy of the agenda?
Sorry, Martin. Do you have an extra copy?
Haven't checked your email yet this morning, Sandra. Late again, huh?
Oh, come on, Martin. You know I'm never late. I think our server is down or something.
Here, you can have a look at mine.
Thanks, Dave.
After the meeting, make sure to call IT.
Already have.
Good. Okay. As you know, the main objective of this meeting is to agree on ways to make up the budget shortfall of $154,000 we're facing. I hate to say it, but it's belt-tightening time.
Speaking of belt-tightening, whatever we do, we can't cut the free gym memberships. That would be totally demotivating, don't you think?
Let's get to that in a moment, Sam. Let me first go through the agenda. As you can see, we have a lot to cover. From the agenda, there are 10 areas we've identified for potential cuts. We'll run through them in order. Any questions before we start?
Nope.
Nope.
We'll break for lunch at 11:30, if that's okay with you guys.
That's fine.
Fine by me.
Sure.
Good. Okay. Let's move straight to the first point on the agenda. Outsourcing cleaning. Sandra, could you please kick off?
There are many ways to open a meeting. It depends, obviously, on the type of meeting and the situation. But there are 6 key points that you will always need to consider when starting a meeting. First, getting everybody's attention. Second, welcoming and thanking. Third, introducing any new colleagues. Fourth, explaining the objectives. Fifth, looking at the agenda. And sixth, asking someone to start. Let's look at how Martin handles each of these steps. First, getting attention. What does Martin say at the very beginning of the meeting?
All right. Is everybody here? Great. I think we can get started. Well, good morning, everyone.
This language attracts everyone's attention and lets them know the meeting is starting. What else could Martin say?
Okay, let's get down to business.
All right, then. Can we get started?
Okay, folks, let's get started, shall we?
All right. Can I get everybody's attention? I think it's about time we get started.
All right, everybody, we need to get this show on the road.
The last example, we need to get the show on the road, is an informal idiom that means we need to start. So, Martin has gotten everybody's attention. What's next?
I'm sorry I had to call this meeting at such short notice. Did you all get a copy of the agenda?
To create a professional atmosphere, Martin is sure to welcome and thank everyone for attending. Practice some more ways to do this.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all here. Did everyone get the agenda?
Great! Thank you all for coming.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to see you all here. I know it's a long way for some of you to come. I really appreciate your being on time and ready to work.
What is the reason that Sandra doesn't have a copy of the agenda? She's having some email problems. She says, "I think our server is down or something." A server is a computer that delivers information or software to other computers on a network. But by saying "or something," Sandra shows that she doesn't really understand what's going on. This is a good example of useful, vague, or unspecific language. Let's practice some more examples of "or something."
Have you found the problem with the numbers?
We've been looking all afternoon, but still can't seem to find it. I think there's a problem with the spreadsheet, or something.
The boss is looking really happy. He must have gotten a bonus.
Or something. I heard he has a new girlfriend. Maybe that's it.
So, Martin has gotten everybody's attention and welcomed and thanked everybody. What's next? If there are any new colleagues to introduce, he can do that now. For example, he could say,
First of all, I'd like to introduce George from the Hong Kong office. Would you like to say a few words about yourself, George?
Everybody say hello to Karumi. She's visiting us from the Japan office.
In this case, however, there is no one to introduce. So Martin just moves on to the next thing, explaining the objectives of the meeting.
Okay, as you know, the main objective of this meeting is to agree on ways to make up the budget shortfall of $154,000 we're facing. I hate to say it, but it's belt-tightening time.
To tighten one's belt is an idiom that means to reduce waste or expenditures. Expenditures means spending. So when Martin says it's belt-tightening time, he means it's time to cut spending. How does he explain the objective of the meeting? He says, as you know, the main objective of this meeting is to... This is a good way to tell everybody the purpose of your meeting. What are some other ways?
The reason we're meeting today is to work out ways to deal with the marketing challenges that we're facing.
The primary purpose of this meeting will be to start a discussion on ways to cope with the huge increase in demand that we're seeing.
The main problem that we're facing is how to manage our growth.
The main thing I'd like to accomplish today is defining the key problem areas that we see with our current plan.
Notice the strong use of word partnerships or collocations in each of the examples you've just listened to. We face, cope with, deal with, or define problems and challenges. By the way, challenge is a good word to use. It sounds more optimistic than problem. Now what happens? Sam, the operations manager, changes the subject, doesn't he? He says, speaking of belt tightening, whatever we do, we can't cut the free gym memberships. That would be totally demotivating, don't you think? For definitions of gym memberships and demotivating, be sure to check the learner's notes. When Sam changes the topic, Martin says, let's get back to that in a moment, Sam. This is a good expression for controlling the meeting. We'll be looking at ways of leaving and returning to the main topic in more detail during the second episode. So far, Martin has got everybody's attention, welcomed and thanked everybody, and explained the objectives. He still needs to look at the agenda, doesn't he? How does he do that?
Let me first go through the agenda. As you can see, we have a lot to cover. From the agenda, there are 10 areas we've identified for potential cuts. We'll run through them in order. Any questions before we start?
Potential means possible. Martin plans to run through them in order. In other words, to deal with them one by one. Again, pay attention to the collocations and useful language in this example. Go over the agenda. Have a lot to cover. Potential areas for cuts and run through something in order are all useful expressions. Now, let's take a look at some other ways to look at the agenda.
Let's take a quick look at the agenda. As you can see, it's broken down into 5 main parts.
I've divided up the meeting today into 3 parts.
I prepared some figures to help us compare the 2 options. I'll distribute them now.
Next, Martin talks about lunchtime plans. When you open a meeting, introducing the agenda is obviously a good place to talk about any other important rules or housekeeping details, such as when you will take a break, how long the meeting will last, and what people should do if they have to take a phone call, and so on. After confirming when they'll break for lunch, the final thing Martin needs to do is to ask someone to start. He says,
Good. Okay. Let's move straight to the first point on the agenda. Outsourcing cleaning. Sandra, could you please kick off?
outsourcing means to have another company, usually called a vendor, perform some service for you. So, outsourcing cleaning means that instead of having their own cleaning staff, Daneline will hire a cleaning company to do it for them. Please kick off simply means please start. This is a common business idiom that comes from football, where kick off means to start the game. What are some other ways to kick off the first item on the agenda?
Great. Well, we have a lot to cover, so let's get down to business. George, could you start by explaining the background on the first item?
All right then. Let's start then, shall we? Katie, why don't you tell us what you've been thinking on the advertising issue?
Right. Suzanne, would you be so kind as to begin?
Now it's your turn to speak. We're going to practice opening a meeting. Imagine you're a manager at Daneline, and you're holding a meeting to discuss the budget shortfall your team is facing. Give a short speech to open the meeting. Remember to include all 6 parts. Do you remember what they are? First, get everybody's attention. For example, you can say, "Okay, let's get down to business." Next, be sure to welcome everyone and thank them for coming. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all here. Did everyone get the agenda? The third part is to introduce any new colleagues. But let's say everyone knows each other, so this step is not necessary for this practice. 4. Explain objectives. For example, the main problem that we're facing is how to deal with the budget shortfall. Next, look at the agenda. To keep it simple, you can say the agenda is divided up into 2 parts, discussing the problem and brainstorming. Brainstorming means thinking of solutions. And 6, don't forget to ask someone to start. For example, "All right then, let's start, shall we? Katie, why don't you kick it off?" Now, you'll hear a series of cues for each part. After each beep, use an appropriate phrase. Are you ready? Let's give it a try.
Getting everyone's attention. Welcoming and thanking. Explaining the objectives. Looking at the agenda. Asking someone to start.
How did you do? Listen to an example answer with all the steps together.
Example answer. Well, all right then. Can we get started? Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I had to call this meeting at such short notice. Did you all get a copy of the agenda? Good. The reason we're meeting today is to work out ways to deal with the budget shortfall that we're facing. Let's take a quick look at the agenda. As you can see, it's broken down into two parts. First, we'll discuss the problem, and then brainstorm solutions. Great. Well, we have a lot to cover, so let's get down to business. George, could you start?
Remember to try the practice again. This time, substitute new language to build up fluency. All right, so that covers this episode on opening a meeting. You've learned the 6 parts of opening a meeting: getting attention, welcoming and thanking, introducing new colleagues, looking at the agenda, and asking someone to start. You've also reviewed some common idioms, vocabulary, and collocations for meetings and budget discussions. In the next units, we'll be learning ways to manage the discussion and keep everybody on track. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Business English Pod, the business English podcast for professionals on the move. This is the second in a 2-part series on opening and managing meetings. In the first episode, we looked at how to open a meeting. In today's podcast, we're going to cover how to manage the discussion. Martin, the general manager of Dane Line Singapore, is discussing with his staff how to make up a budget shortfall. He's just asked Sandra to kick off the first item on the agenda, outsourcing the cleaning.
Sandra, would you please kick off?
Well, this is a great way to cut a lot of fat. My figures show that we can save almost $50,000 with this one.
Can I just come in here? That reminds me, we really can't have pizza for lunch again. It's unhealthy.
Sorry, Sam, but I think this is a bit of a sidetrack. Let's try to keep to the agenda, okay? I want to get everyone out of here on time.
Of course.
So, as I was saying, outsourcing the cleaning can really save a lot of money. It's a no-brainer if you ask me.
Uh-huh. What do others think? Is there anything else we should consider?
Well, frankly, I think it's a little harsh just to let people go. After all, we've been working with them side by side for years, and we have to think about how it will affect morale.
Right. We seem to have dealt with the outsourcing issue. Now, let's move on to the brochures. We've budgeted $68,500 to redesign and reprint all the sales and marketing brochures. Dave, this is your area of expertise. What do you think?
Well, obviously, if we're facing a shortfall, we need to make cuts. And this cut would be less painful than many of the others. But we really have to prioritize sales, because this is the bread and butter of our business. Perhaps we can consider a limited redesign?
I agree.
I do too. You know, Dave, speaking of the brochure, you should really consider using a different vendor for the brochures this time. I didn't think they did a good job on the last ones at all.
I'm with you 100%.
You may have a point there, Sandra, but let's leave that for the regular team meeting on Thursday. We still have a lot to cover.
Okay.
All right, can we go around the table to make sure everyone agrees? All those in favor of a limited redesign of the brochure?
Yep.
All those against?
During the meeting, both Sam and Sandra attempt to change the topic. But Martin does a pretty good job of following the agenda, doesn't he? Let's study how Martin keeps the discussion on track. Along the way, we'll also look at some idioms and other useful language. The first person to try to change the topic is Sam. Remember, Sandra is talking about how much money they can save by outsourcing cleaning.
Well, this is a great way to cut a lot of fat. My figures show that we can save almost $50,000 with this one.
Sandra says that outsourcing is a great way to cut a lot of fat. Similar to the phrase to tighten one's belt, which we learned last time, to cut a lot of fat means to save a lot of money. This makes Sam think of food.
Can I just come in here? That reminds me, we really can't have pizza for lunch again. It's unhealthy.
It sounds as though Sam's stomach is more important to him than the budget discussions, doesn't it? Notice how Sam uses, "that reminds me." This useful phrase links to what was just said to change the topic of discussion. What you said reminds me of something else. So Sam has attempted to change the topic. How does Martin get him back on track?
Sorry, Sam, but I think this is a bit of a sidetrack. Let's try to keep to the agenda, okay? I want to get everyone out of here on time.
Martin uses the phrase, "I think this is a bit of a sidetrack," to show that he feels the group has gone off the main topic onto an unimportant side issue. He is careful to emphasize the benefit to the group of keeping to the agenda by saying, "I want to get everyone out of here on time." That is, he wants everyone to be able to leave on time. Martin's skillful action guides the discussion back on track. Returning to the topic gives Sandra a chance to finish what she was saying.
So, as I was saying, outsourcing the cleaning can really save a lot of money. It's a no-brainer if you ask me.
So, as I was saying, let Sandra continue from where she was interrupted. How does she feel about outsourcing? She strongly supports it, saying that it's a no-brainer. That means it's so obvious that you don't need a brain to figure it out. Later on in the discussion, Sandra also tries to change the topic. Remember, Dave has proposed a limited or partial redesign of the brochure. He is against totally abandoning the brochure project because sales should be prioritized, meaning that this should be given high importance. He says sales are the bread and butter of the business. This is an idiom that means something is very important to the business's profit. Dave's proposal reminds Sandra of a point she'd like to make. Let's listen.
Perhaps we can consider a limited redesign?
I agree.
I do too. You know, Dave, speaking of the brochure, you should really consider using a different vendor for the brochures this time.
Similar to Sam's "that reminds me," Sandra uses "speaking of the brochure" to change the topic. This kind of expression is particularly useful in informal discussions or when socializing and making small talk. We'll be looking in more detail at ways to change the topic during later episodes on social English. Now, let's listen to how Martin gets the discussion back on track this time.
You may have a point there, Sandra, but let's leave that for the regular team meeting on Thursday. We still have a lot to cover.
In this expression, and in Martin's previous suggestion that this is a bit of a sidetrack, notice the strong journey metaphor. Metaphor means to describe something in terms of something else. In this case, we understand discussions in terms of a journey with a goal. The meeting participants are travelers who have to keep to or follow the agenda, which is the road. With the journey metaphor in mind, let's review the language for keeping the discussion on track.
I can see what you're saying, but let's try to keep to the agenda.
To save time, we need to stay on track. Let's try not to get too far off topic.
Let's get back to that later. For now, I really want to stick to the agenda.
That's an interesting point, but let's talk about that when we come to it. Can we get back to the main point?
We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I suggest we do our best to stay on track.
So far, you've covered language for changing the topic and sticking to the agenda. Now, let's look at some language for widening the discussion to make sure you've heard different points of view. Remember earlier when Sandra says that outsourcing cleaning is a no-brainer? What does Martin say to bring other people into the discussion?
Uh-huh. What do others think? Is there anything else we should consider?
What do others think is an effective way to widen the discussion to include more people. What are some other phrases Martin could use?
What other approaches are there to this problem? Does anybody have any ideas?
How about other people? Any comments?
Let's go around the table and get reactions to that idea. Who would like to begin?
Are there any other ways to think about this?
Great. We've covered changing the topic, sticking to the agenda, and widening the discussion. Now let's study how Martin moves from one point to the next in the meeting. What does he say after the team has finished talking about outsourcing?
Right. We seem to have dealt with the outsourcing issue. Now, let's move on to the brochures.
Similar to making a transition in a presentation, Martin signals that the last part has finished and the new part is beginning. Let's listen to some more language for doing just that.
Good. I'd say that's about all for that topic. Now, let's turn to the issue of sales.
Well, we've just about covered the San Francisco office. Let's continue by discussing Buenos Aires.
Time is pressing. Let's leave that there and move on to the next point on the agenda, okay?
Take note of the professional way Martin asked Dave about his opinion on the next topic. He says, "Dave, this is your area of expertise. What do you think?" For a more complete review of other ways to ask for and give opinions, you can go back to BEP 27. In addition, agreeing and disagreeing are covered in BEPs 28 and 29. Okay, there is one last topic to cover in today's episode: checking that everyone agrees in order to reach a decision. Listen to what Martin says at the end of the dialogue.
All right, can we go around the table to make sure everyone agrees? All those in favor of a limited redesign of the brochure?
Yep.
Aye.
All those against?
To go around the table means to take a vote. You can either run through the participants one by one, or as Martin does, have them respond as a group by asking all those in favor and all those against. What are some other ways to check if everyone agrees?
Can I get a quick show of hands? All those in favor?
Let's take a vote. How many people are for this idea? Against? Thanks.
Just quickly, is there anyone else that supports the strategy of reducing overhead? Please raise your hands.
Now it's your turn to practice. We're going to study keeping the discussion on track and including other people in the discussion. First, imagine you're chairing a meeting at Dane Line about how to deal with a budget shortfall. You're talking about the first item on the agenda, outsourcing the cleaning. But members of your team, Pat and Brooks, keep changing the topic. After each beep, use a phrase we've studied to keep the discussion on track. For example, "I can see what you're saying, but let's try to keep to